Tonight we journey into one of the darkest chapters in human history, a time when our ancestors stood on the edge of extinction. Tens of thousands of years ago, the human population may have fallen so low that every person alive today could trace their ancestry back to a remarkably small group of survivors. Entire landscapes changed, ancient climates turned hostile, and for a brief moment in deep time humanity's future hung by a thread. Who were these last survivors? What nearly wiped our species from the earth? And how did a handful of people manage to carry the human story forward when so many others vanished forever? Before we uncover the evidence hidden in fossils, genetics, and the ancient world, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more fascinating journeys into humanity's forgotten past. Now dim the lights, settle in, and travel back to the age when the survival of our species was anything but certain. There is no monument marking the moment humanity almost disappears. No ruined capital stands alone in a desert to commemorate it. No surviving chronicle records the fear of the people who lived through it. There's only a scattering of clues buried in ancient sediments, preserved in fragments of DNA hidden in volcanic ash, and carried silently through the bodies of every person alive today. For a brief span of deep prehistory, the human story narrows to a thread so thin that it nearly snaps. The world around those distant people is vast, unstable, and increasingly hostile. Seasons shift in ways that generations struggle to predict. Familiar landscapes transform, rivers change course, grasslands expand and contract, forests retreat, animals migrate. Some disappear entirely from regions where they once thrived. Human communities that have survived for countless generations suddenly face pressures unlike anything their ancestors remember. What survives in the record suggests that this is not a single disaster unfolding in a single year. It is something slower and in many ways more dangerous. It is a prolonged age of uncertainty. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate many details, but a broad picture has gradually emerged from decades of archaeological, genetic, and geological research. Somewhere in the distant past, humanity passes through one of the most severe crises in its existence. The total number of surviving humans may fall to astonishingly low levels. Entire populations vanish. Some regions appear to lose human occupation altogether. The future of the species becomes dependent upon a remarkably small number of survivors. Seen from the perspective of the present, it feels almost impossible. Modern humanity numbers in the billions. Cities shine across continents. Aircraft cross oceans in hours. Satellites circle the planet. Vast networks connect people across thousands of miles. Yet all of this traces back to a time when the entire future of the species may have rested in the hands of a few scattered communities struggling simply to remain alive. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The strange thing about humanity's darkest age is that nobody living through it knows what it will become. The survivors do not see themselves as guardians of the future. They are not preserving civilization. Civilization, as later ages will understand, it does not yet exist. They are hunters, gatherers, travelers, parents, children, and elders. Their concerns are immediate and practical. Water must be found, food must be secured, shelter must be maintained, dangerous animals must be avoided, families must endure another season. Every sunrise represents another small victory. Their world is both beautiful and unforgiving. Across parts of Africa, dramatic landscapes stretch beneath changing skies. Volcanic mountains rise in the distance. Great lakes expand and shrink. Dry plains meet wooded valleys. Herds move across open ground. Predators follow behind. Human groups navigate these environments with remarkable skill, carrying generations of accumulated knowledge about plants, animals, weather, and terrain. Yet even the most adaptable species has limits. Environmental changes that unfold over centuries can reshape entire regions. Areas that once provide reliable resources may become difficult to inhabit. Water sources fluctuate. Vegetation patterns shift. Animal populations move elsewhere. Communities that have occupied the same territories for generations face difficult choices. Some adapt locally, others migrate. Some disappear from the archaeological record altogether. The farther researchers investigate this period, the stranger the story becomes. Ancient stone tools appear in some places and vanish in others. Layers of sediment preserve evidence of changing climates. Fossils reveal the movements of animals responding to environmental stress. Genetic studies point toward a dramatic reduction in human population size sometime in the distant past. Different lines of evidence do not always agree perfectly, but together they suggest a period of extraordinary vulnerability. No single explanation fully accounts for every observation. Some researchers emphasize climate instability, others focus on volcanic activity. Still others point toward a combination of environmental pressures acting simultaneously across large regions. The exact balance remains debated, but the underlying reality appears increasingly difficult to dismiss. Humanity survives a crisis that could easily have ended the story altogether. This realization changes the way the past is viewed. History is often imagined as a steady progression toward the present. Looking backward, survival can seem inevitable. It is tempting to assume that modern humans are destined to succeed because they ultimately do succeed. The evidence tells a different story. For most of human existence, survival is never guaranteed. Entire branches of the human family tree disappear. Countless populations leave no descendants. Environmental shifts repeatedly challenge communities across vast territories. The path leading to the modern world is neither straight nor secure. It is narrow, fragile, and filled with moments when a different outcome appears entirely possible. The survivors of humanity's darkest age stand at one of those moments. They do not know that future cities will rise. They do not know that agriculture will eventually transform landscapes. They do not know that ships will cross oceans or that machines will fly through the sky. They cannot imagine global civilizations, written languages, or scientific institutions. What they know is the immediate reality surrounding them. A child must be fed. A wound must heal. A journey must be completed. A source of water must last through another dry season. These ordinary concerns become the foundation upon which the entire future of the species ultimately rests. There is something profoundly humbling about that fact. The greatest turning points in human history are not always marked by kings' empires or famous battles. Sometimes they occur in forgotten valleys along isolated shorelines, or within small communities whose names are lost forever. Sometimes the most important achievement is not conquest or innovation, but simple endurance. To survive another year, to raise another generation, to carry knowledge across a dangerous age. As the centuries pass, evidence accumulates quietly in the earth. Ash settles from distant eruptions. Bones become buried beneath sediment. Ancient campsites disappear beneath changing landscapes. DNA passes from parent to child, preserving hidden records of survival long after memories vanish. Thousands of generations later, scientists begin assembling these scattered fragments. A pattern slowly emerges. The story is incomplete. Many chapters are missing. Entire populations remain invisible to the archaeological record. New discoveries continue to revise old assumptions, yet the broad outline remains remarkably compelling. Humanity appears to have passed through a bottleneck so severe that every living person may trace part of their ancestry to a surprisingly small group of survivors. They are the last survivors of humanity's darkest age. Their numbers are uncertain. Their names are unknown. Their individual stories are lost. But their survival changes everything. Without them, there are no later migrations across continents. There are no ancient civilizations, no cities, no kingdoms, no written histories, no modern world, only silence. And somewhere ahead, hidden beneath layers of evidence and uncertainty, lies the question that continues to fascinate researchers today: just how close did humanity come to disappearing forever? The closer researchers look at humanity's deep past, the more remarkable the numbers become. For most species, population size rises and falls continuously. Favorable conditions lead to growth. Harsh conditions lead to decline. Yet occasionally a species experiences something far more dramatic. A population shrinks so severely that only a small fraction remains. Genetic diversity collapses. Entire family lines disappear forever. The species survives, but only barely. This phenomenon is known as a population bottleneck. In modern times, conservation biologists observe similar events among endangered animals. A species may be reduced to a few hundred individuals or even fewer. If recovery occurs, future generations carry the genetic signature of that narrow escape. Long after population numbers increase, evidence of the crisis remains preserved in their DNA. What makes humanity unusual is that traces of such a bottleneck appear within every living person. The first hints emerge as genetic science advances during the late 20th century. Researchers comparing human DNA across different populations discover something surprising. Despite humanity's enormous global population and vast geographic distribution, genetic variation among humans is relatively limited. At first glance, this seems strange. Modern humans occupy nearly every environment on Earth. They live in deserts, forests, mountains, grasslands, tropical islands, and polar regions. They speak thousands of languages and belong to countless cultures. Yet genetically, humans are remarkably similar to one another compared to many other species. This observation raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps humanity passes through a period when the total population becomes extraordinarily small. Over time, increasingly sophisticated genetic analyses begin supporting this idea. Different studies produce different estimates, and scholars continue debating the precise numbers, but many point toward a dramatic reduction in the breeding population of early humans sometime during the distant past. The figures are startling. Some estimates suggest that the effective breeding population may have fallen to only a few thousand individuals. Other models propose even smaller numbers during certain periods. It is important to understand what these figures mean. They do not necessarily represent the total number of living humans. Rather, they reflect the individuals contributing genetic material to future generations. Even so, the implications are profound. Humanity may have survived through a period when the future of the species depended upon a surprisingly small number of people scattered across limited regions. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single study settles the question. Genetics is powerful, but it cannot provide a perfect census of prehistoric populations. Nevertheless, the broad pattern appears repeatedly. At some point in the distant past, humanity experiences a severe demographic contraction. The challenge is determining why. Genetic evidence alone cannot explain the causes behind the decline. For that, researchers turn to archaeology, geology, paleoclimatology, and anthropology. What they find is a world undergoing repeated upheaval. The period associated with these ancient bottlenecks is not a stable era. Climatic conditions fluctuate dramatically over tens of thousands of years. Glacial cycles alter global environments. Rainfall patterns shift. Habitats expand and contract. Ecological communities reorganize themselves in response to changing conditions. Human populations are forced to adapt continuously. Unlike many specialized species, humans possess unusual flexibility. They can exploit diverse food sources. They can move across landscapes. They can modify tools and strategies in response to new challenges. These abilities provide significant advantages, yet flexibility has limits. A sufficiently severe environmental crisis can overwhelm even highly adaptable populations. Some researchers envision scattered communities becoming increasingly isolated from one another. As favorable habitats shrink, groups may retreat into pockets of survivable territory. Connections between populations weaken. Genetic diversity decreases. Certain lineages disappear completely. The archaeological record provides occasional glimpses of this process. Stone tools appear in one region suggesting occupation. Then evidence grows sparse. In another area, signs of human activity continue, despite deteriorating environmental conditions. Certain landscapes seem capable of supporting small populations even during difficult periods. Others become increasingly marginal. These patterns hint at a fragmented world. Instead of a large interconnected population spread across broad territories, humanity may have existed as scattered clusters separated by considerable distances. Communication between groups would have been limited. Movement carried risks. Environmental barriers could isolate communities for generations. Such isolation creates both dangers and opportunities. Small populations are vulnerable to disease accidents, resource shortages, and environmental disruptions. A single drought can have devastating consequences. A failed hunting season can threaten survival. Local catastrophes may erase entire communities. At the same time, isolated groups often develop unique adaptations to local conditions. Different populations experiment in effect with different survival strategies. Some succeed, others vanish. Across thousands of years, natural selection works relentlessly. Individuals capable of coping with changing conditions leave descendants. Those less suited to the environment often do not. The process is slow, indifferent, and extraordinarily powerful. Modern humans inherit the outcome. One of the most intriguing aspects of the bottleneck hypothesis is the sheer improbability of what follows. If populations truly fall to such low levels, countless future possibilities disappear forever. Entire genetic lineages vanish. Alternative versions of humanity are lost. Every living person today descends from the survivors rather than the countless individuals whose lines eventually end. The scale of that loss is difficult to imagine. For every ancestral line that reaches the present, thousands of others terminate somewhere in the distant past. Most leave no trace beyond faint signals buried within ancient genomes and fragmentary archaeological remains. Scholars still debate the timing of the most severe bottlenecks. Some studies emphasize events hundreds of thousands of years ago. Others identify different periods of demographic stress. Human evolution is complex and multiple contractions may occur across deep time. What remains increasingly clear is that survival is far from guaranteed. The modern world often creates an illusion of permanence. Vast populations can make extinction seem unimaginable. Yet deep history tells a different story. Species rise and fall. Environments transform. Entire branches of the human family disappear. The ancestors of modern humanity are not exempt from these realities. They endure because a small number of communities successfully navigate circumstances that eliminate many others. The question then becomes where these survivors live. If much of the world grows increasingly difficult, certain regions must provide refuge. Certain landscapes must remain productive when others fail. Certain environments must support enough food, water, and stability to sustain human populations through generations of uncertainty. Somewhere within those refuges, humanity preserves its future. The search for those places leads into an ancient world that is changing in dramatic and often unpredictable ways. Temperatures fluctuate, rainfall shifts, ecosystems reorganize themselves, familiar territories become unreliable. New opportunities emerge briefly before disappearing again. The bottleneck is not merely a matter of numbers. It is the story of a planet becoming more difficult to inhabit and of a species struggling to adapt before time runs out. The survivors do not know they are participating in one of the most important chapters of human history. They simply endure, generation after generation, season after season, while the world around them grows increasingly uncertain. Long before cities rise, before agriculture reshapes continents, before the first written words are carved into stone, the planet enters a period of profound instability. The changes do not arrive all at once. No single morning dawns upon a transformed world. Instead, generations witness subtle shifts accumulating over centuries. Rivers behave differently. Wet seasons become less predictable. Grasslands expand where forests once stood. In other places, vegetation retreats entirely. Lakes grow larger, then shrink. Animal migrations alter routes that have remained stable for thousands of years. To human communities living through these changes, the world begins to feel less certain. Modern science reveals that Earth during this distant period is anything but static. The climate system operates through immense natural cycles that unfold across tens of thousands of years. Variations in Earth's orbit influence how sunlight is distributed across the globe. Ice sheets advance and retreat. Atmospheric conditions fluctuate. Ocean circulation patterns shift. The result is a planet constantly reorganizing itself. For humans dependent upon local environments, these changes matter enormously. A slight reduction in rainfall can alter entire ecosystems. Plant communities respond. Herbivores follow the vegetation. Predators follow the herbivores. Human groups occupying the highest and most flexible position in many food webs are forced to respond as well. What survives in the geological record suggests that certain regions experience repeated environmental stress. Periods of relative abundance alternate with intervals of scarcity. Productive landscapes may remain favorable for centuries before deteriorating. Areas that once support large populations become difficult to occupy. Water sources fluctuate unpredictably. Competition for resources intensifies. For communities without agriculture, surplus food reserves are limited. Survival depends upon mobility, environmental knowledge, and social cooperation. When conditions deteriorate gradually, people can often adapt. They alter migration routes. They diversify food sources. They exploit new habitats. Human beings possess extraordinary behavioral flexibility, one of the defining strengths of the species. Yet adaptation becomes far more difficult when environmental pressures accumulate from multiple directions simultaneously. Researchers studying ancient sediments, fossil pollen lake deposits, and other environmental records have reconstructed portions of this changing world. The picture that emerges is not one of a single catastrophic event, but of recurring instability. Some regions become drier. Others experience dramatic climatic fluctuations. Ecosystems that support abundant wildlife may contract or fragment. Human populations must repeatedly adjust to circumstances beyond their control. Among the most important of these changing landscapes are the environments of Africa, where the story of early modern humans is deeply rooted. Today, Africa contains extraordinary environmental diversity. Deserts, savannas, tropical forests, mountains, coastlines, and wetlands create a complex mosaic of habitats. Ancient Africa is similarly varied, but the boundaries between these environments shift dramatically through time. The Sahara provides one striking example. Modern observers often imagine it as an eternal desert. In reality, the Sahara has undergone enormous transformations. At various points in prehistory regions now dominated by sand support, lakes, rivers, grasslands, and abundant wildlife. Then conditions change again. A landscape that appears hospitable during one era may become forbidding during another. These transformations have profound consequences for human movement. Migration routes open and close. Populations expand into newly favorable territories, and later retreat when conditions worsen. Groups that once interact regularly become isolated. Isolation becomes a recurring theme in humanity's darkest age. As environmental corridors disappear, communities find themselves increasingly separated from one another. Information spreads more slowly. Opportunities for exchange diminish. Genetic diversity may decline as populations become fragmented. The evidence remains incomplete, but many researchers believe such fragmentation plays a crucial role in the bottleneck story. Meanwhile, another force occasionally reshapes the environment with little warning. Volcanoes. East Africa is one of the most geologically active regions on Earth. Massive tectonic forces continue to reshape the landscape today, and they are equally active in deep prehistory. Volcanic eruptions periodically alter ecosystems, deposit ash across wide areas, and affect local climates. Most eruptions are regional events. Some are far larger. The possibility that volcanic activity contributes to periods of human stress has attracted considerable scientific attention. Scholars continue debating the extent of its influence, but few dispute that major eruptions can produce significant environmental consequences. Ash blankets vegetation, water sources become contaminated, animal populations relocate, local ecosystems experience sudden disruption. For already vulnerable human communities, such disturbances can be devastating. Yet climate and geology are only part of the story. The natural world itself is changing. Large mammals dominate many prehistoric environments. Some are familiar to modern observers, others belong to lineages that eventually disappear. Human populations share landscapes with an astonishing variety of creatures, many considerably larger and more dangerous than those encountered by most people today. Competition for resources is constant. Predators threaten human communities. Environmental stress affects animals as well as people. When herbivore populations decline or relocate, human hunters must adjust their strategies accordingly. Every ecological shift creates consequences that ripple outward through the system. The survivors of humanity's darkest age navigate this complexity without scientific instruments, written records, or long-distance communication networks. Their understanding comes from observation accumulated across generations. They learn which valleys retain water during dry seasons. They remember where certain plants continue growing when others fail. They recognize subtle signs of environmental change. Knowledge becomes a survival tool as important as any stone blade, perhaps even more important. What makes this period remarkable is not merely the severity of environmental pressures, but the persistence of human communities despite them. Again and again, conditions deteriorate. Again and again, populations adapt. Some groups disappear, others endure. The archaeological record preserves only fragments of these struggles. A scatter of stone tools beside an ancient shoreline, animal bones near a campsite, layers of sediment recording changing rainfall patterns, traces of fire, evidence of repeated occupation and abandonment. Individually, each clue seems modest. Together they reveal a species living within a world that rarely stands still. Scholars still debate the precise relationship between climate shifts and demographic decline. No single explanation fully accounts for every observation. Different regions experience different challenges. Some communities likely suffer from drought. Others face cooling temperatures. Still others confront ecological transformations that alter resource availability in unexpected ways. The complexity itself may be the key. Humanity's darkest age is not caused by one problem. It emerges from the interaction of many pressures acting across generations. Climate instability, environmental fragmentation, geological disruption, resource uncertainty, population isolation. Each factor alone might be survivable. Combined, they create conditions under which the future of an entire species becomes unexpectedly fragile. Somewhere within this changing world, small communities begin moving toward places that offer a chance of survival. Certain landscapes continue providing food and water when surrounding regions become less reliable. These refuges do not promise safety. They merely offer possibility. And for the last survivors of humanity's darkest age, possibility is enough. As conditions become increasingly unpredictable across large portions of the ancient world, survival begins to depend less on strength and more on geography. Some landscapes fail, others endure. The difference can determine whether an entire population disappears or survives long enough to see conditions improve. From a modern perspective, it is tempting to imagine humanity spreading continuously across vast territories. Yet during periods of severe environmental stress, the opposite often occurs. Populations contract. Movement becomes more cautious. Communities abandon marginal regions and concentrate in areas capable of supporting life through difficult times. These places become refuges, not perfect environments, not untouched paradises, simply locations where the balance between resources and hardship remains just favourable enough for human survival. The search for such refuges lies at the heart of humanity's darkest age. Across Africa, environmental conditions vary dramatically from one region to another. While drought affects some areas, others retain reliable water sources. While grasslands shrink in certain locations, productive ecosystems persist elsewhere. Rivers, lakes, coastlines, wetlands, and elevated highlands each offer unique opportunities. For small populations facing repeated challenges, these differences matter enormously. One valley may sustain life, while another nearby becomes increasingly difficult to inhabit. One coastline may continue producing marine resources even when inland environments deteriorate. One lake basin may preserve critical water supplies during prolonged dry periods. Researchers studying ancient human occupation patterns have identified several regions that appear particularly important during times of climatic stress. These areas repeatedly show evidence of long-term human presence, even when surrounding territories experience substantial environmental change. The evidence remains incomplete, but certain patterns emerge with remarkable consistency. Coastal regions often play a significant role. Today, coastlines support enormous human populations. In prehistory, they offer a different set of advantages. Marine environments can provide relatively dependable food sources. Fish, shellfish, seabirds, and other coastal resources sometimes remain available, even when inland ecosystems fluctuate dramatically. This reliability may prove crucial. Along portions of southern Africa, archaeological sites preserve evidence suggesting that early human populations make increasing use of coastal resources during difficult periods. Shell-midden stone tools and other remains hint at communities capable of exploiting environments that many earlier populations use less intensively. The significance of this adaptation cannot be overstated. Food security allows populations to persist. Persistence allows knowledge to accumulate. Knowledge increases the likelihood of long-term survival. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that some human groups become remarkably skilled at extracting resources from diverse environments. Rather than relying exclusively on large game, they broaden their diets. Fish, shellfish, small animals, edible plants, and seasonal resources all contribute to survival. Flexibility becomes one of humanity's greatest advantages. While specialized species often struggle when conditions change rapidly, humans possess an unusual capacity to modify behavior. If one food source declines, another may replace it. If one territory becomes uninhabitable, migration remains possible. If familiar patterns fail, experimentation offers alternatives. Yet adaptability alone cannot guarantee success. Refugees must also provide stability. Fresh water remains among the most important requirements. Across prehistoric landscapes, reliable water sources often determine the boundaries of human occupation. Lake springs, rivers, wetlands, and seasonal pools become focal points around which life organizes itself. When water disappears, communities face difficult decisions. Some move, Some attempt to remain. Some vanish from the record entirely. Archaeologists occasionally discover evidence of repeated occupation around ancient water systems stretching across thousands of years. These locations suggest that certain regions function as long-term anchors during periods of environmental uncertainty. The communities occupying them may not realize their significance. To them, these places are simply home, but viewed from deep time, they become islands of continuity within a changing world. Isolation, however, creates new challenges. As populations retreat into scattered refuges, contact between groups may diminish. Distances that once seemed manageable become difficult to cross. Environmental barriers separate communities. Social networks shrink. This fragmentation carries consequences beyond immediate survival. Genetic diversity may decline. Technological innovations spread more slowly. Information becomes localized. Entire populations can disappear without neighboring groups ever knowing. The world grows larger as human connections become smaller. In some regions, mountains may provide protection. Elevated landscapes often create environmental conditions distinct from surrounding lowlands. Cooler temperatures, reliable rainfall, and ecological diversity sometimes make highland environments attractive refuges during periods of climatic stress. Elsewhere, river systems perform a similar function. Even when broader landscapes become increasingly arid, major waterways can support plants, animals, and human communities. These corridors allow movement, provide food, and create opportunities for interaction. Yet no refuge is completely secure. Environmental stability is always relative. A lake that supports life for centuries may eventually shrink. A productive coastline may experience ecological shifts. A river may alter its course. Human communities remain vulnerable to forces beyond their control. Perhaps this uncertainty explains one of the most remarkable features of human survival. Rather than depending upon a single sanctuary, humanity appears to persist through a network of refuges. Different populations occupy different environments. Some rely heavily on coastal resources, others inhabit river valleys. Others survive in upland regions or ecologically diverse landscapes. This distribution reduces risk. If one refuge fails, others may continue. If one population disappears, another may endure. The future of the species no longer depends upon a single location. It depends upon multiple communities finding different solutions to the same problem. Scholars still debate the exact geography of these refuges. New discoveries regularly alter existing interpretations. Some regions once considered marginal now appear increasingly important. Other areas remain poorly understood due to limited archaeological evidence. The picture continues evolving. Yet a broad reality emerges from decades of research. Humanity survives not because the world remains stable, but because certain pockets of stability persist within a larger pattern of disruption. The survivors learn to recognize these places. They follow seasonal rhythms. They understand local ecosystems in extraordinary detail. They pass knowledge between generations. Where water can still be found, which plants remain dependable. When animals migrate, how weather patterns shift. Knowledge becomes a form of shelter. In many ways, it is the most important refuge of all. Long before written language, human communities carry vast stores of environmental understanding within memory and tradition. Every successful hunt, every dangerous drought, every reliable spring contributes to a collective body of experience. That knowledge allows survival where ignorance might mean death. As generations pass, the descendants of those who endure become increasingly adapted to uncertainty itself. They live in a world where change is expected. Flexibility becomes normal, resilience becomes essential. And within these scattered refuges, hidden among coastlines, valleys, wetlands, and highlands, the foundations of humanity's future quietly persist. The populations remain small, the dangers remain immense, the outcome remains uncertain, but the species is still alive, and for the moment that is enough. The archaeological record rarely preserves individual lives. Kings may leave inscriptions, empires may leave monuments, ancient cities may leave walls and roads, but the people who survive humanity's darkest age leave behind something far more subtle: a scatter of stone flakes beside a vanished shoreline, burned fragments of bone, traces of hearths long extinguished, layers of discarded shell, footprints pressed into mud and preserved by chance. From these fragments, researchers attempt to reconstruct entire worlds. The result is necessarily incomplete, yet a surprisingly vivid picture begins to emerge. Life among the last surviving communities is neither endlessly desperate nor comfortably secure. It exists somewhere in between. Survival requires constant effort, but these people are not merely victims of catastrophe. They are skilled, knowledgeable, and remarkably adaptable human beings navigating a difficult age. Each day begins with practical concerns. Water remains essential, food remains uncertain, weather conditions must be assessed, children require protection, injuries must be managed, social relationships must be maintained. The challenges are familiar to humans everywhere throughout history. The difference lies in the margin for error. A failed harvest can be survived if granaries exist. A poor hunting season becomes less dangerous if neighbouring settlements provide assistance. A drought is easier to endure when trade networks extend across continents. None of those systems exist here. The communities enduring humanity's darkest age live close to environmental reality. Their success depends directly upon their understanding of local landscapes. That understanding is extraordinary. Modern people often underestimate the knowledge possessed by prehistoric hunter-gatherers. Yet surviving in changing environments requires a level of ecological awareness that few people today can imagine. Individuals must recognize hundreds of plant species, understand animal behavior, predict seasonal changes, locate water, interpret weather patterns, and navigate vast territories without maps. Mistakes carry consequences. Correct decisions can sustain entire families. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that these communities organize themselves into relatively small groups. Exact numbers vary and scholars continue debating details, but many populations likely consist of extended families connected through broader social networks. Such arrangements offer advantages. Small groups remain mobile. They require fewer resources. They can respond quickly to environmental changes. At the same time, they depend heavily upon cooperation. No individual survives alone for long. Food is shared. Knowledge is shared. Responsibilities are distributed. Children learn through observation and participation. Elders preserve accumulated experience. Every member contributes in some way to collective survival. This cooperation may prove one of humanity's greatest strengths during periods of crisis. Many animal species rely primarily upon instinct. Humans rely heavily upon culture. Knowledge acquired by one generation can be transmitted to the next. Successful strategies accumulate over time. Mistakes become lessons. Experience becomes inheritance. In a world characterized by uncertainty, this ability provides enormous advantages. Around evening, fire's information passes between generations. No written records exist. No libraries preserve knowledge. Memory serves that function instead. The location of distant water sources, the behavior of migratory animals, the timing of seasonal changes, the dangers associated with particular landscapes. All of this becomes part of a living archive carried within people rather than stored within buildings. The importance of such knowledge becomes especially apparent during environmental instability. Conditions that remain predictable require less explanation. Conditions that change constantly reward those capable of adapting. The survivors become experts at adaptation. Archaeological evidence suggests increasingly sophisticated tool use in some regions. Stone implements are carefully shaped for specific purposes. Different materials are selected according to local availability. Techniques improve through generations of experimentation. These tools may appear simple compared to modern technology, but simplicity can be deceptive. A carefully crafted stone point represents accumulated expertise stretching back thousands of years. Every successful design embodies countless observations, failures, and refinements. Technology during this period is not stagnant. It evolves continuously. Researchers have also uncovered evidence suggesting growing behavioral complexity among certain populations. The timing and significance of these developments remain subjects of ongoing debate, but some archaeological sites reveal signs of symbolic behavior, personal ornamentation, and increasingly sophisticated resource management. These discoveries challenge older assumptions about prehistoric people. The survivors of humanity's darkest age are not primitive in any meaningful sense. They think, plan, cooperate, teach, innovate, and adapt. Their lives are different from modern lives, but their minds are recognizably human. Perhaps nowhere is this humanity more visible than in the care communities provide one another. Archaeological discoveries occasionally reveal individuals who survive serious injuries or disabilities that would have been difficult to endure without assistance. Such evidence suggests social support extending beyond immediate survival needs. Someone gathers food for the injured. Someone protects the vulnerable. Someone invests time and effort into another person's well-being. These actions leave faint traces in the archaeological record, but their implications are profound. Compassion becomes a survival strategy. Communities capable of cooperation often outperform those dominated by constant internal conflict. Trust increases resilience. Shared responsibility distributes risk. Collective knowledge improves decision-making. The harsh conditions of humanity's darkest age may actually strengthen the importance of social bonds, yet life remains dangerous. Predators still threaten human populations. Accidents occur. Diseases spread. Food shortages emerge. Environmental conditions fluctuate unpredictably. Death is a familiar presence. Infant mortality is high by modern standards. Many individuals never reach old age. The communities that endure do so not because they avoid hardship, but because they develop ways of coping with it. One of the more surprising aspects of prehistoric life involves the sheer amount of movement. Many populations are highly mobile. Seasonal migrations allow access to different resources throughout the year. Communities may travel considerable distances between familiar locations. Landscapes are not static backgrounds, but active components of survival strategies. Paths become known through repeated use. Water sources are remembered. Shelters are revisited. Entire territories are mapped within memory. To outsiders, these journeys might appear uncertain. To those undertaking them, they are guided by generations of accumulated experience. Scholars still debate many details of daily life during this period. The evidence remains incomplete. Different regions almost certainly develop different survival strategies. Coastal communities may live differently from inland groups. Highland populations may face challenges distinct from those inhabiting river valleys. No single description captures all experiences, yet common themes emerge: flexibility, cooperation, knowledge, mobility, resilience. These qualities appear repeatedly wherever evidence survives. What makes this period remarkable is not merely that humans survive. Many species survive environmental change. The remarkable fact is how humans survive. They adapt behavior faster than biology alone could manage. They create solutions. They share information. They transform experience into collective memory. These abilities allow small communities to persist even as the wider world becomes increasingly uncertain. Generation after generation, they carry forward more than their genes. They carry forward knowledge. And in doing so, they preserve something even more valuable than survival itself. They preserve possibility. The possibility that one day, when the long crisis finally begins to ease humanity, will still be here to inherit the future. If the last surviving communities are to endure through humanity's darkest age food, alone is not enough. Water alone is not enough. Shelter alone is not enough. Something less visible must also survive. Knowledge. Unlike claws, fangs-thick fur, or other biological adaptations, human beings depend heavily upon information passed from one generation to the next. Much of what makes human survival possible exists not in the body but in the mind. Skills, observations, techniques, warnings, and memories accumulate over time, forming an invisible inheritance that can prove more valuable than any physical resource. During periods of extreme environmental stress, this inheritance becomes essential. A child born into one of these ancient communities enters a world already shaped by countless generations of experience. The landscape may appear wild and unpredictable, but it is not entirely unknown. Others have walked these routes before. Others have survived droughts, floods, shortages, and migrations. Their lessons remain alive. No written language exists to preserve them. No books record them. No monuments commemorate them. Yet knowledge travels successfully across centuries. This achievement may be one of humanity's greatest accomplishments. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies often observe extraordinary bodies of environmental knowledge. People can identify subtle changes in weather track animals across difficult terrain, locate hidden water sources, recognize edible and medicinal plants, and navigate landscapes with remarkable precision. Such skills are not acquired instantly. They require years of learning. The survivors of humanity's darkest age likely possess similar expertise, perhaps even greater expertise in some cases. The environments they inhabit are dynamic and often unforgiving. Mistakes can carry severe consequences. Correct decisions can mean the difference between survival and disappearance. Knowledge becomes a form of insurance against uncertainty. A community that remembers where water remains during prolonged droughts gains an advantage. A group that understands seasonal animal movements improves its chances of securing food. Families that recognize early signs of environmental change can respond before conditions become critical. Over time, accumulated experience becomes increasingly valuable. The remarkable aspect of human culture is that it allows knowledge to outlive individuals. A skilled hunter eventually dies. The techniques remain. An elder who remembers a distant drought eventually disappears. The memory survives through those who learn from them. This process creates continuity across generations. The archaeological record occasionally offers hints of this transmission. Stone tools become particularly revealing. At first glance, a prehistoric stone point appears simple. Yet producing one often requires complex knowledge. Suitable raw materials must be located. Appropriate techniques must be learned. The finished tool must match its intended purpose. These skills do not emerge spontaneously. Someone teaches them. Someone learns them. Someone improves them. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that certain technological traditions persist across remarkably long periods. Specific manufacturing methods appear repeatedly over thousands of years. This continuity implies successful cultural transmission despite changing environmental conditions. The people themselves may disappear. Their knowledge endures. Sometimes innovations spread beyond individual communities. A particularly effective technique may gradually move between groups through interaction migration or social exchange. New ideas become part of a larger network of survival strategies. The extent of these networks remains debated. The evidence is fragmentary, and scholars continue exploring how connected ancient populations actually are. Yet increasing evidence suggests that even small hunter-gatherer communities often maintain broader social relationships than once assumed. Such connections can prove invaluable during difficult times. If resources fail in one area, neighboring groups may provide opportunities elsewhere. Information about environmental conditions can travel through social networks. Potential marriage partners from distant communities help maintain genetic diversity. Relationships become another form of resilience. The preservation of fire offers a particularly striking example of cultural inheritance. Today, producing fire may seem straightforward. For prehistoric communities, mastery of fire represents one of the most important technologies ever developed. Fire provides warmth, protection, light, cooking. It transforms food, extends activity into darkness, and allows occupation of environments that might otherwise be inaccessible. The knowledge required to maintain and create fire becomes deeply embedded within human culture. During humanity's darkest age, losing such knowledge would carry enormous costs. Fortunately, it appears to persist. Again and again, archaeological sites reveal evidence of controlled fire use. Hearths leave traces in sediments. Burned bones survive. Charcoal remains buried within ancient occupations. These small clues testify to the continuity of human learning. The same pattern appears in food acquisition strategies. Communities do not simply exploit whatever resources happen to be nearby. They often display sophisticated understanding of seasonal opportunities. Different foods are gathered at different times. Hunting strategies adapt to changing conditions. Coastal populations increasingly utilize marine resources. Inland groups develop their own approaches. Flexibility itself becomes a learned skill. Perhaps this explains why humans prove so resilient compared to many other species. Biological evolution operates slowly. Cultural evolution can operate much faster. A successful innovation may spread through a community within a single generation. A useful observation can influence behavior immediately. Knowledge allows adaptation without requiring genetic change. This capability becomes especially important during periods of rapid environmental instability. The survivors are not merely reacting to circumstances. They are actively learning from them. Each drought teaches lessons. Each migration reveals new information. Each environmental challenge contributes to an expanding reservoir of experience. The process is imperfect, of course. Not every lesson is correct. Not every innovation succeeds. Some communities undoubtedly make mistakes. Some disappear despite their efforts. The evidence remains incomplete, and the record preserves failures less clearly than successes. Yet the overall pattern remains unmistakable. Enough knowledge survives. Enough communities adapt. Enough people endure. Another intriguing possibility concerns symbolic behavior and communication. Archaeological discoveries from parts of Africa suggest increasing evidence of symbolic thinking among some early human populations. Decorative objects, pigments, engravings, and other materials hint at cognitive and cultural developments, whose full significance scholars still debate. No single explanation fully accounts for these discoveries. Some researchers view them as signs of increasingly complex social communication. Others emphasize their role in group identity or cultural cohesion. Whatever their precise function, such behaviors may strengthen social bonds during difficult times. Shared symbols help communities maintain unity. Unity supports cooperation. Cooperation improves survival. The chain connecting culture to survival becomes increasingly apparent. Knowledge is not limited to practical skills. It also includes social knowledge. How to cooperate, how to share resources, how to resolve conflicts, how to maintain relationships across generations. All of these contribute to resilience. Viewed from the perspective of deep history, the survival of humanity appears increasingly unlikely and increasingly impressive at the same time. The environmental challenges remain severe. Populations remain small. The future remains uncertain. Yet scattered communities continue carrying forward an invisible inheritance accumulated across thousands of years. They preserve techniques. They preserve memories. They preserve relationships. Most importantly, they preserve the capacity to learn. That capacity may ultimately become humanity's greatest refuge. Not a mountain valley, not a coastline, not a river basin, but the ability to transform experience into knowledge and pass that knowledge onward. Because while landscapes continue changing around them, The survivors possess something that can travel anywhere, the lessons of those who came before, and those lessons will soon guide people beyond the boundaries of familiar territory into migrations that reshape the future of the species itself. For generations, survival often means staying close to the landscapes that still provide food, water, and stability. Then gradually survival begins to demand something different. Movement, not the routine seasonal journeys that many communities already practice, but larger shifts in territory, longer explorations and migrations that carry people into unfamiliar environments. The same environmental pressures that once forced populations into refuges now begin pushing some of them outward again. The process is neither sudden nor organized. There is no great departure. No leader stands before a gathered population and announces the beginning of a migration. Instead, movement unfolds slowly, family by family, generation by generation, until the cumulative effect becomes one of the most important developments in human history. The world remains difficult, but it is not uniformly hostile. Environmental conditions fluctuate across regions. Some landscapes improve while others deteriorate. Water returns to certain areas. Vegetation expands into territories that were previously less hospitable. Animal populations alter their distributions in response. Human communities respond accordingly. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that people repeatedly take advantage of changing opportunities. A newly favourable valley attracts settlement. A productive grassland encourages expansion. A reliable river corridor becomes a pathway into new territory. Mobility has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths. Unlike species tied closely to particular habitats, humans possess the ability to relocate when circumstances demand it. This flexibility allows populations to track resources across changing landscapes. The survivors of humanity's darkest age become masters of this strategy. Their movements are not random. They follow water. They follow animals. They follow seasonal abundance. They follow opportunity. Every successful migration expands the range of possibilities available to future generations. Yet movement carries risks. Unfamiliar landscapes contain unfamiliar dangers. Water sources may prove unreliable. Predators may behave differently. Food resources may not match expectations. Groups entering new territory must learn quickly. The ability to acquire and transmit knowledge becomes even more important. A community exploring unfamiliar environments relies heavily upon observation. Which plants are edible? Which animals are dangerous? When do seasonal rains arrive? Where can shelter be found? Mistakes can be costly, but successful adaptation opens new horizons. Archaeologists studying ancient migration patterns often encounter a frustrating reality. The evidence is fragmentary. Human movement leaves fewer traces than permanent settlements. Small groups travelling across large landscapes can disappear almost entirely from the record. Even so, enough clues survive to reveal an increasingly dynamic picture. Stone tool traditions appear in new regions. Genetic evidence indicates population expansion. Environmental records suggest changing patterns of occupation. Taken together, these signs point toward growing mobility. The bottleneck has not ended completely. Human populations remain relatively small compared to later eras, yet the survivors are no longer merely holding on. Some are beginning to expand. This distinction matters. During the darkest phase of a crisis, the primary goal is persistence. Once conditions improve even slightly, new possibilities emerge. Exploration becomes worthwhile. Connections between previously isolated populations become more feasible. Exchange increases. Ideas spread. Genes spread. The human world slowly becomes larger again. One particularly important feature of prehistoric migration involves the role of ecological corridors. Certain landscapes naturally facilitate movement. River systems provide water and food. Coastlines offer dependable resources. Grassland corridors allow animals and humans to travel considerable distances. When environmental conditions align favorably, these pathways can connect populations separated for generations. The consequences are significant. Isolated communities gain access to new information. Marriage networks expand. Technological innovations spread more widely. Genetic diversity increases. Each connection strengthens resilience. Scholars still debate the precise timing and routes of many prehistoric migrations. New discoveries frequently challenge older assumptions. Some pathways once considered central now appear less important. Others emerge as increasingly significant. What remains clear is that migration occurs repeatedly throughout human history. Movement is not an exception. It is a defining characteristic of the species. The survivors of humanity's darkest age inherit this tendency and refine it. As populations expand into new environments, they encounter conditions requiring fresh solutions. Coastal groups continue exploiting marine resources. Inland populations adapt to different ecological opportunities. Some communities become highly skilled at hunting large animals. Others focus on diverse combinations of plant and animal foods. There is no single model for success. Different landscapes reward different strategies. This diversity becomes another strength. If all populations rely upon identical solutions, a single environmental change can threaten everyone simultaneously. Varied approaches reduce risk. Humanity survives partly because different groups experiment with different ways of living. Some innovations succeed, others fail. The successful ones spread. Viewed across thousands of years, the process resembles a vast collective effort to discover how best to inhabit an unpredictable planet. Migration contributes directly to that effort. Every new territory entered provides additional knowledge. Every environmental challenge expands human experience. Every successful adaptation increases the species' overall resilience. Yet movement also creates encounters. The world inhabited by these migrating populations is not empty. Modern humans are not the only humans alive. Across portions of Eurasia and perhaps elsewhere, other human relatives occupy their own territories. Some have survived for hundreds of thousands of years. They possess their own histories, adaptations, and traditions. The descendants of Africa's survivors will eventually meet them. The consequences of those encounters will shape the future of humanity in ways that researchers are still uncovering. For now, however, the migrations continue. A family follows a river into unfamiliar country. A small group explores a coastline extending beyond known territory. Generations move gradually farther from ancestral homelands. The distances travelled in any single lifetime may be modest. The distances accumulated across centuries become extraordinary. This is one of the great paradoxes of human expansion. No individual intends to populate continents. No generation sets out to reshape the world. Yet countless small decisions combine into vast historical transformations. A campsite established beside a distant water source. A successful journey into new territory. A decision to remain rather than return. Such choices seem ordinary in the moment. Over deep time, they alter the destiny of the species. The survivors who once cling to isolated refugees now begin carrying humanity outward once more. The process remains slow. The dangers remain real. The future remains uncertain. But movement itself signals something important. The crisis has not vanished, yet humanity is no longer solely retreating from danger. In scattered regions across the ancient world, people are beginning to reclaim territory, step by step, generation by generation. The descendants of a few surviving communities are transforming survival into expansion. And beyond the horizon, in landscapes occupied by other human species, a new chapter of the story waits to unfold. For most of modern history, humanity imagines itself alone. Not alone on the planet in the sense of being the only animal, but alone as a human species. The idea seems natural. Every person alive belongs to the same species. Differences in language, culture, and appearance exist, yet all humans remain part of a single global population. Deep prehistory tells a different story. As the descendants of the survivors continue expanding across landscapes reshaped by environmental change, they enter a world where other kinds of humans still exist. This realization is one of the most remarkable discoveries of modern science. The human family tree is not a straight line leading inevitably toward the present. It is a branching structure filled with experiments, adaptations, successes, and extinctions. Numerous human relatives emerge across millions of years. Some persist for astonishing lengths of time, others disappear relatively quickly. By the period following humanity's darkest age, several branches of this family tree still survive. The exact timing and relationships remain subjects of active research, but the broader picture is increasingly clear. Modern humans are not alone in the ancient world. Among the most famous are the Neanderthals. For much of the 20th century, Neanderthals are often portrayed as primitive and doomed. Subsequent discoveries radically transform that image. Archaeological evidence reveals capable, adaptable people who inhabit challenging environments across Europe and parts of Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They hunt large animals. They manufacture sophisticated tools. They control fire. They care for injured members of their communities. In many respects, they appear far more human than earlier stereotypes suggest. To the east, another group leaves behind a different mystery. Known today as the Denisovans, they remain almost entirely unknown until the 21st century. Unlike Neanderthals, whose fossils are relatively abundant, Denisovans emerge primarily through genetics. Tiny fragments of bone and teeth reveal an unexpectedly significant human population that once occupies portions of Asia. Their story remains incomplete. The evidence is sparse, yet genetic traces demonstrate that they play an important role in human history. Other human relatives may persist as well. Researchers continue debating the identities and relationships of several populations known from fragmentary remains. Some lineages survive longer than once believed. Others may represent groups not yet fully understood. The ancient world proves far more crowded than earlier generations imagine. For the descendants of Africa's survivors, this reality creates new possibilities. Migration no longer means simply entering empty landscapes. It means entering territories already inhabited by other humans. The nature of these encounters remains one of the great mysteries of prehistory. No written records exist. No eyewitness accounts survive. The evidence must be reconstructed from archaeology, genetics, and fossil discoveries. What emerges is both fascinating and complicated. For many years, researchers debate whether modern humans completely replace other human species without significant interaction. This view gradually changes as genetic evidence accumulates. The turning point arrives when scientists discover something extraordinary within the DNA of living people. Neanderthals are not entirely gone, at least not in a genetic sense. Many modern populations outside Africa carry small percentages of Neanderthal ancestry. Similar discoveries later reveal Denisovan ancestry within certain populations as well. The implications are profound. Modern humans do not merely encounter these relatives, they sometimes have children together. Those descendants survive. Their genetic legacy remains present today. This finding transforms understanding of humanity's past. The story is no longer one of simple replacement. It becomes a story of interaction. Yet interaction does not guarantee harmony. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate many details. Some encounters may be peaceful, others may involve competition. Different regions likely produce different outcomes. No single explanation fully accounts for every situation. What seems increasingly certain is that the ancient world contains multiple human populations navigating similar environmental challenges. Each group possesses its own adaptations. Neanderthals thrive in environments that many modern humans initially find difficult. Denisovans appear capable of inhabiting diverse landscapes across large regions. Modern humans bring their own strengths, including extensive social networks, remarkable flexibility, and rapidly evolving cultural traditions. The encounters between these groups become one of the defining processes of late human evolution. Competition is inevitable in some places. Resources remain limited. Climate fluctuations continue. Territories overlap. Small populations face constant pressures. Under such conditions, even minor advantages can produce significant long-term consequences. Modern humans gradually expand. Neanderthal populations eventually disappear. Denisovans vanish from the visible fossil record. Other human relatives disappear as well. The reasons remain debated. Climate change may play a role. Competition may contribute. Population size may matter. Interbreeding may absorb some groups into larger populations. Different explanations likely apply in different circumstances. The process is complex. What makes it particularly striking is that humanity's darkest age may help shape the outcome. The severe bottlenecks experienced by ancestral modern humans create populations that are highly adaptable, mobile, and capable of surviving difficult conditions. The descendants of those survivors inherit traits and cultural strategies forged during prolonged environmental stress. Those adaptations prove valuable during later expansions. Flexibility becomes an advantage. Broad diets become an advantage. Extensive social connections become an advantage. The ability to innovate becomes an advantage. None of these qualities guarantee success individually. Together they create resilience. Yet it would be misleading to portray the story as a simple triumph. Something is lost as well. Every extinct human lineage represents a unique way of being human. Each possesses its own history, its own adaptations, its own accumulated knowledge. When these populations disappear, entire chapters of the human story vanish with them. Only fragments remain, a few fossils, stone tools, genetic traces, scattered archaeological sites, enough to reveal their existence but rarely enough to tell their full stories. The descendants of humanity's bottleneck survivors carry forward while others fade into history, not because they are necessarily superior in every respect, but because circumstances favor certain populations at particular moments. Survival often depends upon timing as much as capability. A fortunate refuge, a successful adaptation, a slightly larger population, a stronger social network. Small differences can echo across thousands of years. By the time the process concludes, modern humans become the sole surviving human species. The world that once contains multiple branches of the human family tree grows quieter. Yet the disappearance is not complete. Neanderthals remain within genomes. Denisovans remain within genomes. The echoes of ancient encounters persist inside living people. Humanity carries pieces of those lost relatives into the present, and as scientists begin examining ancient DNA more closely, they uncover evidence that not only explains these encounters, but also reveals just how severe the earlier crisis of survival may truly have been. For most of human history, ancestry is remembered through stories. Families recall parents, grandparents, and perhaps a few generations beyond. Names fade, memories disappear, the deeper past becomes impossible to reconstruct. Then, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a new source of evidence begins transforming the study of human origins: DNA. Hidden within every cell of the human body lies a record unlike any other. It is incomplete. It contains no descriptions of landscapes or individual lives. Yet it preserves something equally valuable: the history of inheritance itself. Generation after generation, genetic information passes from parent to child. Small changes accumulate over time. Populations divide, migrate, mix, and sometimes disappear. Long after campsites vanish and bones decay, traces of those events remain embedded within genomes. Scientists learn to read these traces. The results are extraordinary. Many of the most important discoveries about humanity's darkest age do not emerge from excavations alone. They emerge from the genetic signatures carried by living people and preserved within ancient remains. One of the first major revelations concerns population size. As researchers compare DNA from populations around the world, they encounter a recurring pattern. Human genetic diversity appears surprisingly limited relative to the enormous number of people living today. This observation points toward a simple but profound conclusion. The ancestors of modern humans likely passed through periods when population numbers become much smaller than they are now. The exact figures remain debated. Different methods produce different estimates. Some studies suggest effective breeding populations numbering only a few thousand individuals. Others propose even narrower bottlenecks during specific intervals. Scholars continue refining these models as new data become available. Yet the overall pattern remains remarkably consistent. Humanity's ancestral population appears to have been unexpectedly small. The implications are difficult to overstate. Every city on Earth, every nation, every language, every family, all trace back through time toward a surprisingly limited pool of ancestors. This does not mean that only a few thousand people are alive at any given moment. Effective population size is a more complex measure involving reproductive patterns and genetic inheritance. Nevertheless, the evidence strongly suggests that the human lineage experiences severe demographic contractions. The survivors of those contractions become the ancestors of everyone living today. Genetics also reveals something else. Human populations are deeply interconnected. For centuries, people often imagine ancestry in terms of separation. Different regions seem isolated. Different populations appear distinct. DNA tells a more complicated story. Again and again, researchers find evidence of movement and mixing. Ancient populations rarely remain completely isolated for long periods. Individuals migrate. Groups interact. Genes travel across landscapes. Even relatively small amounts of exchange can leave detectable traces thousands of years later. This interconnectedness becomes especially important when studying recovery after population bottlenecks. Small populations face risks. Reduced genetic diversity can limit adaptability. Certain harmful traits may become more common. Isolation increases vulnerability. Gene flow between groups helps counteract these problems. As surviving populations reconnect, genetic diversity begins increasing once more. Recovery becomes possible. One of the most fascinating discoveries concerns the legacy of ancient adaptation. Some genetic traits carried by modern humans appear linked to environmental challenges faced by distant ancestors. Researchers continue investigating these relationships, and many questions remain unresolved. Yet evidence increasingly suggests that ancient populations adapt biologically as well as culturally to changing conditions. Natural selection leaves fingerprints. The process is rarely dramatic. It unfolds gradually across generations. Individuals possessing traits that improve survival or reproduction become slightly more likely to leave descendants. Over thousands of years, those advantages accumulate. The descendants of humanity's bottleneck survivors inherit the results. Ancient DNA also transforms understanding of encounters with other human species. Before genetic analysis becomes possible, Neanderthals and modern humans are often viewed as entirely separate populations. The assumption seems reasonable given the limited evidence available at the time. DNA overturns that assumption. The discovery of Neanderthal ancestry in living humans reveals that interaction occurs. Later discoveries concerning Denisovans provide additional surprises. Fragments of ancient genomes reveal lineages previously unknown to science. Tiny bones from remote archaeological sites become windows into entire populations. The story grows increasingly complex. Human evolution resembles a braided river more than a straight line. Populations divide, reconnect, exchange genes, separate again. Different branches contribute to the ancestry of later groups. Some disappear entirely, others leave lasting legacies. The deeper scientists look, the less simple the story becomes. Yet amid this complexity, one theme remains constant: survival. Every genetic sequence carried into the present represents an unbroken chain of successful reproduction, stretching back through countless generations. Any interruption ends the line. The fact that modern humans exist at all means that somewhere in the distant past enough individuals survive every crisis. The bottleneck does not eliminate humanity, it narrows humanity. This distinction matters. Extinction ends a story. A bottleneck reshapes it. Entire genetic lineages vanish forever. Others become disproportionately important. Future populations inherit only a fraction of the diversity that once exists. The survivors influence all subsequent generations. In a very real sense, humanity's darkest age helps determine what modern humanity becomes. Some researchers have proposed particularly severe bottleneck scenarios occurring hundreds of thousands of years ago. Recent studies continue exploring these possibilities, generating both excitement and debate within the scientific community. As always, caution remains important. The evidence is powerful but not perfect. Genetic models rely upon assumptions. New discoveries frequently revise existing interpretations. Scholars continue debating the timing, severity, and causes of ancient population contractions. No single explanation fully accounts for every observation. Yet uncertainty does not diminish the broader significance. The genetic record independently supports a picture emerging from archaeology, geology, and paleoclimatology. Humanity experiences profound challenges. Populations shrink. Survivors endure. Recovery follows. Perhaps the most humbling lesson comes from considering how much history remains invisible. Every living person carries traces of ancient survival, yet most of the individuals responsible for that survival remain unknown. Their names are lost. Their faces are lost. Their voices are lost. Only fragments remain. A mutation passed through generations. A genetic signature preserved across millennia. A faint clue hidden within the structure of a chromosome. These fragments tell an extraordinary story, not merely of ancestry, but of endurance, of communities surviving conditions severe enough to leave marks visible hundreds of thousands of years later. And while DNA reveals remarkable insights, it cannot answer every question. Genes tell us that a crisis occurs. They tell us populations shrink. They tell us recovery follows. To understand how those people actually lived and what traces they leave behind in the physical world, researchers must turn once more to the Earth itself, where clues remain buried beneath stone sediment and time. If DNA provides the outline of humanity's darkest age, archaeology supplies many of its textures. The challenge is that those textures survive only in fragments. Unlike the great civilizations that emerge much later, the people who endure this ancient crisis leave behind no cities, no palaces, no written histories, and no monumental architecture. Their world is recorded in subtler ways: a discarded stone blade, a cluster of animal bones, a layer of ash, the faint stain of an ancient hearth preserved beneath thousands of years of accumulated sediment. To reconstruct their lives, archaeologists must become specialists in traces. Every fragment matters. A single stone tool may reveal how people hunt, process food, or adapt to changing environments. The location of an archaeological site may indicate where water once existed. Animal remains can provide evidence about climate, vegetation, and migration patterns. When combined, these clues begin to illuminate a period that otherwise remains almost invisible. One of the most remarkable aspects of prehistoric archaeology is how much information can emerge from apparently insignificant discoveries. A handful of shells found far from the modern coastline may indicate ancient sea levels. Microscopic grains of pollen can reveal long-vanished ecosystems. Charcoal fragments may preserve evidence of controlled fire use. Tiny chemical signatures trapped within sediments can help reconstruct environmental conditions stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The Earth becomes an archive. An incomplete archive certainly, but one capable of preserving astonishing amounts of information. Researchers investigating humanity's darkest age often face a frustrating reality. The archaeological record is uneven. Some regions preserve evidence exceptionally well, others preserve almost nothing. Entire populations may vanish without leaving recognizable traces. This absence does not necessarily mean nobody lives there. It may simply reflect the difficulty of preserving evidence across immense spans of time. The deeper into prehistory researchers travel, the greater this problem becomes. Erosion destroys sites. Rivers alter landscapes. Volcanic activity buries evidence. Coastlines shift dramatically. Countless traces disappear forever. What remains is only a fraction of what once existed. This incompleteness creates one of the central mysteries surrounding humanity's ancient bottleneck. Archaeologists can identify signs of occupation in certain regions. They can trace changes in tool technology. They can reconstruct environmental conditions with increasing accuracy. Yet many details remain frustratingly out of reach. How many people survive? Exactly where do they live? How frequently do different groups interact? Which regions function as the most important refuges? The evidence provides clues but rarely definitive answers. Scholars continue debating these questions. Nevertheless, several patterns appear repeatedly. One involves the persistence of occupation in certain locations despite environmental instability. Some sites show evidence of repeated human use across extraordinarily long periods. Even as climates fluctuate and ecosystems transform, people return to the same general regions again and again. These places may represent the refuges discussed earlier in the story: reliable water sources, productive coastlines, ecologically diverse landscapes, areas capable of sustaining life when surrounding territories become more difficult. The archaeological record cannot always prove this interpretation conclusively, yet the pattern is difficult to ignore. Another recurring theme involves innovation. Far from stagnating during periods of stress, human communities often continue developing new techniques and strategies. Tool designs evolve, resource use becomes increasingly diverse. Evidence suggests growing flexibility in how people exploit different environments. This adaptability may help explain survival. Species that rely upon narrow ecological niches often struggle when conditions change dramatically. Humans repeatedly demonstrate the opposite tendency. They broaden options. They experiment. They learn. The archaeological record preserves traces of these adjustments. Along some coastlines, evidence indicates increased exploitation of marine resources. Elsewhere, hunting strategies shift in response to changing animal populations. Different regions reveal different solutions. No single survival strategy dominates. Instead, humanity appears to generate a variety of responses to environmental uncertainty. This diversity becomes a strength. Some approaches fail. Others succeed. The successful ones contribute to long-term resilience. Archaeology also reveals something deeply human about these ancient communities. They are not merely surviving. They are creating meaning. At several sites dating to later phases of human expansion, researchers discover evidence suggesting symbolic behavior. Pigments, decorative objects, engravings, and other materials hint at forms of expression, extending beyond immediate practical needs. The interpretation of these discoveries remains debated. Some scholars emphasize communication, others focus on social identity. Still others argue for ritual or symbolic significance. No single explanation fully accounts for every example. Yet taken together, these discoveries suggest populations capable of increasingly complex social worlds. Even during difficult times, human beings remain more than survival machines. They create relationships. They preserve traditions. They communicate ideas. They construct identities. These qualities may contribute to resilience as much as technological innovation does. Strong social bonds can help communities withstand hardship. Shared beliefs can strengthen cooperation. Cultural traditions can preserve valuable knowledge across generations. The archaeological record offers only glimpses of these processes, but those glimpses are compelling. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of prehistoric archaeology lies in what is missing. For every site discovered, countless others are lost. For every preserved campsite, thousands vanish without trace. The record resembles a puzzle from which most pieces have disappeared. Researchers work carefully to avoid drawing conclusions that exceed the available evidence. The uncertainty is real. The gaps are substantial. New discoveries frequently overturn long-held assumptions. A single fossil can alter interpretations. A newly excavated site can reshape entire migration models. Science advances precisely because the picture remains incomplete. This incompleteness should not be mistaken for weakness. Rather, it reflects the extraordinary challenge of reconstructing events separated from the present by hundreds of thousands of years. The fact that any coherent picture emerges at all is remarkable. From scattered artifacts, buried sediments, fossil remains, and environmental records, researchers have assembled a compelling narrative of survival against immense odds. Yet one question continues to loom over the evidence. What exactly causes the crisis? Archaeology reveals its consequences. Genetics reveals its demographic effects. Environmental records reveal instability. But identifying the primary driving force proves far more difficult. Was climate the dominant factor? Did volcanic events play a critical role? Were multiple pressures acting simultaneously? The deeper scholars investigate, the more complex the answer appears. And within that complexity lies one of the most important debates in the study of humanity's darkest age, a debate that continues to evolve with every new discovery pulled from the earth. The deeper researchers investigate humanity's darkest age, the less likely it appears that a single cause explains everything. Human beings often prefer simple explanations. A great flood destroys a civilization. A war ends an empire. A plague empties a city. These narratives are satisfying because they offer clear beginnings and endings. Deep prehistory rarely behaves that way. The evidence surrounding humanity's ancient bottleneck points instead toward a convergence of pressures, a series of overlapping challenges that gradually transform survival from something difficult into something precarious. Climate sits at the center of nearly every discussion. For understandable reasons, environmental conditions shape food availability, water access, migration routes, vegetation patterns, and animal distributions. Even modest climatic changes can have substantial consequences for populations living directly from the land. The geological record reveals that Earth during this period is far from stable. Glacial cycles expand and contract across the planet. Rainfall patterns fluctuate. Temperatures rise and fall. Habitats shift repeatedly. Entire ecosystems reorganize themselves over thousands of years. For human communities dependent upon local resources, these changes create continual challenges. Many researchers argue that climate instability alone may account for much of the demographic stress reflected in genetic studies. The logic is compelling. As favorable environments shrink, populations become concentrated in fewer regions. Competition increases. Groups become isolated. Local extinctions occur. The cumulative effect could produce significant population reductions without requiring any single catastrophic event. Evidence from ancient lake-level sediment cores, fossil pollen, and other environmental indicators often supports this view. Periods of severe drought appear in some regions. Elsewhere, changing rainfall patterns alter vegetation and animal distributions. The world becomes less predictable. Adaptation becomes increasingly necessary. Yet climate alone may not explain everything. Another possibility involves volcanic activity. Few natural events can transform environments as rapidly as major eruptions. Ash can blanket enormous territories. Vegetation can be damaged or destroyed. Water sources can become contaminated. Atmospheric conditions can change temporarily. For vulnerable populations already facing environmental stress, such disruptions may prove devastating. Among the most frequently discussed possibilities is the eruption of the Toba supervolcano in present-day Indonesia approximately 74,000 years ago. The scale of this eruption is extraordinary. It ranks among the largest volcanic events known during the Quaternary period. Vast quantities of material are ejected into the atmosphere. Ash spreads across enormous distances. Geological evidence preserves traces of the event across much of southern Asia and beyond. For a time, some researchers propose what becomes known as the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. According to this idea, the eruption triggers severe environmental consequences that dramatically reduce human populations, creating a bottleneck reflected in modern genetic data. The theory attracts significant attention. It is dramatic. It offers a clear mechanism. It appears capable of explaining a major demographic crisis. Yet as more evidence accumulates, the picture becomes increasingly complicated. Archaeological sites in some regions show signs of continued human occupation after the eruption. Genetic timelines do not always align neatly with the single event. Environmental impacts may vary significantly across different areas. Many scholars now view the original version of the hypothesis as overly simplistic. This does not mean Toba is irrelevant. Far from it. The eruption undoubtedly represents a major environmental event. It may contribute to regional disruptions and demographic stress. The question is whether it alone explains humanity's bottleneck. Increasingly, many researchers suspect the answer is no. The evidence appears more consistent with multiple interacting factors. Climate fluctuations may already be placing pressure on populations. Volcanic activity may amplify those pressures. Ecological changes may alter food availability. Population fragmentation may increase vulnerability. Together, these forces create conditions under which severe demographic contractions become possible. This multi-factor explanation lacks the dramatic simplicity of a single catastrophe, yet it aligns more closely with how complex systems often behave. Civilizations rarely collapse for only one reason. Ecosystems rarely transform because of a single variable. Human populations are influenced by numerous interconnected processes operating simultaneously. The same may be true here. Some scholars emphasize the role of environmental fragmentation. Even if total habitable area remains substantial, the division of populations into isolated pockets can create significant challenges. Small groups become vulnerable to local disasters. Genetic diversity declines. Opportunities for exchange diminish. Recovery becomes more difficult. In this view, the crisis emerges not necessarily because the entire world becomes uninhabitable, but because human populations become increasingly disconnected from one another. Others focus on demographic dynamics themselves. Small populations often experience feedback effects. Reduced numbers can limit social networks. Limited networks can reduce opportunities for cooperation and innovation. Lower resilience increases vulnerability to future shocks. A difficult period can therefore become progressively more dangerous over time. Again, no single explanation fully accounts for every observation. The evidence remains incomplete. Some questions may never receive definitive answers. Deep prehistory rarely provides the level of detail available for later historical periods. Yet uncertainty itself reveals something important. Human survival is rarely the product of one factor. Likewise, existential risk rarely emerges from one source alone. The survivors of humanity's darkest age confront a world shaped by interacting challenges: environmental instability, geographical fragmentation, resource uncertainty, population isolation, occasional geological disasters. Each contributes in different ways. Each increases pressure. Together they narrow the margins separating survival from extinction. One particularly intriguing aspect of this debate involves timing. Recent genetic studies have proposed bottlenecks occurring at different moments in human evolutionary history. Some may precede the Toba eruption by hundreds of thousands of years. Others may reflect later events. The story may involve multiple contractions rather than a single crisis. If so, humanity's darkest age becomes less a moment and more an era, a prolonged period during which populations repeatedly face severe challenges. This interpretation may help explain why no single cause appears sufficient. The crisis is not one event, it is a sequence, a chain of pressures unfolding across immense spans of time. Some communities disappear, others survive. Conditions improve temporarily, then worsen again. Recovery begins only to encounter new obstacles. The future remains uncertain for generations. Viewed from this perspective, the most remarkable fact is not that humanity experiences hardship. Many species endure hardship. The remarkable fact is that humanity persists through it, again and again, despite shrinking populations, despite environmental instability, despite fragmentation and uncertainty. Enough communities survive, enough knowledge survives, enough connections survive. The bottleneck narrows but never closes completely. Eventually, the cumulative pressure begins to ease. Environmental conditions stabilize in some regions. Populations expand. Migration increases. The long era of contraction slowly gives way to something else. Not safety, not prosperity, but possibility. And after countless generations spent enduring one of the most difficult periods in human history, possibility is the beginning of recovery. Recovery does not arrive with fanfare. No signal announces that humanity has survived its darkest age. No visible boundary separates the centuries of crisis from the centuries that follow. The transition is gradual, unfolding so slowly that no individual living through it could possibly recognize its significance. Yet across scattered regions of the ancient world, subtle changes begin accumulating. Landscapes that have long been unpredictable become slightly more stable. Water sources remain reliable for longer periods. Vegetation expands into territories that had previously struggled to support life. Animal populations increase in certain regions. The shifts are not universal, and they are certainly not permanent, but for communities accustomed to uncertainty, even modest improvements matter. The difference between survival and growth can be surprisingly small. A slightly longer wet season, a more dependable migration route, a lake that remains full through a difficult year, a productive coastline that continues providing resources generation after generation. Such changes create opportunities. Human populations respond. The descendants of the survivors begin expanding outward from the refugees that sustained them through earlier crises. Areas that once seemed too risky become viable once more. Old pathways reopen, new territories become accessible, connections between groups increase. The world slowly grows larger. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that many populations take advantage of these opportunities with remarkable effectiveness. Communities spread into previously underused landscapes. Technologies continue evolving. Social networks expand. Growth remains uneven. Some regions flourish. Others continue experiencing environmental stress. The ancient world never becomes entirely predictable. Nevertheless, the overall direction begins changing. Instead of contraction, there is expansion. Instead of fragmentation, there is increasing connection. Instead of persistent decline, there is recovery. This transformation has profound consequences. Small populations living in isolation are inherently vulnerable. Larger interconnected populations possess greater resilience. Information travels more widely. Innovations spread more rapidly. Genetic diversity increases. Opportunities for cooperation multiply. The descendants of bottleneck survivors begin benefiting from these advantages. One of the most important developments involves the gradual strengthening of social networks. For much of humanity's darkest age, populations often exist as relatively scattered communities separated by difficult landscapes. As conditions improve, opportunities for interaction increase. People travel farther. Groups encounter one another more frequently. Exchange becomes easier. These connections are not merely social. They influence survival directly. Knowledge moves between communities. Technological innovations spread. Marriage networks reduce isolation. Resources can sometimes be accessed through broader relationships. Each connection strengthens resilience. The cumulative effect is significant. Humanity becomes increasingly capable of absorbing local disruptions without facing species-wide consequences. This does not eliminate hardship. Droughts still occur. Food shortages still occur. Conflicts likely occur. Environmental fluctuations continue. But populations are better positioned to respond. Recovery also influences migration. The movements that begin during earlier periods of adaptation now accelerate. Human populations gradually occupy larger territories. The descendants of a relatively small number of survivors continue spreading across regions that had once been difficult or impossible to inhabit. Some migrations occur over remarkably long timescales. A family moves a short distance. Their descendants move farther. Future generations continue the process. Over centuries and millennia, these incremental movements produce extraordinary results. Continents become interconnected through human expansion. The scale of the transformation is difficult to appreciate from the perspective of a single lifetime, yet viewed across deep time it reshapes the planet. The people responsible for these migrations remain unaware of their historical significance. Their motivations are immediate: food, water, safety, opportunity. The future emerges from countless practical decisions rather than grand plans. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout human history. Major transformations often arise from ordinary choices repeated across generations. Recovery after humanity's darkest age follows the same principle. No one intends to rebuild the species. People simply pursue better lives. The collective result becomes one of the most important recoveries in evolutionary history. Archaeological evidence increasingly reveals signs of growing behavioral complexity during portions of this period. Symbolic traditions appear more frequently. Long-distance movement of materials becomes more visible in some regions. Certain technologies spread across wider areas. The interpretation of these developments remains debated. Different regions follow different trajectories. The evidence is often fragmentary. Nevertheless, many researchers see indications of increasingly sophisticated social systems emerging among expanding populations. If true, the implications are important. Complex social behavior may not merely accompany recovery. It may help drive it. Larger social networks facilitate information exchange. Information exchange encourages innovation. Innovation improves adaptability. Adaptability supports expansion. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Human strengths that prove valuable during the bottleneck continue proving valuable afterward. Flexibility, cooperation, learning, communication. These qualities remain central to success. Interestingly, recovery does not erase the legacy of the crisis. The bottleneck leaves lasting consequences. Genetic diversity reflects earlier population reductions. Certain lineages have already disappeared forever. Many human relatives are declining or vanishing entirely. The world emerging from recovery is not identical to the world that existed before the crisis. History moves forward carrying the imprint of what came before. The survivors shape the future not only through what they preserve, but also through what is lost. Every extinction narrows possibilities. Every survival preserves them. Humanity's recovery unfolds within that balance. Some branches of the broader human family tree are already gone. Others soon will be. The descendants of the bottleneck survivors increasingly dominate the story, not because they are destined to do so, but because circumstances repeatedly favor populations capable of adapting to change. Adaptation becomes the defining lesson of the age. Perhaps this is why the recovery succeeds. The survivors do not wait for stability. They learn to function within uncertainty. They develop strategies that remain effective even when conditions fluctuate. They become experts at resilience. When opportunities finally emerge, they are prepared to take advantage of them. Generation after generation, the effects accumulate. Population numbers increase. Territories expand. Connections multiply. Knowledge grows. The species begins moving toward a future that would have seemed impossible during the darkest moments of the bottleneck. The age of mere survival is ending. Humanity is becoming something larger again, and from the descendants of those scattered communities will eventually emerge every culture, every civilization, and every society that follows. The foundations are already being laid, although no one alive can yet see what they will become. The people who survive humanity's darkest age never build monuments to their achievement. They leave no inscriptions celebrating recovery. No chronicles describe how close the species comes to disappearance. No generation pauses to recognize that it stands at a turning point in the story of humankind. Yet every civilization that appears later rests upon foundations they preserve. The connection is easy to overlook because so much time separates the survivors from the societies that eventually emerge. Tens of thousands of years pass, landscapes change, languages appear and vanish, entire cultures rise and disappear. Still the chain remains unbroken. Every city begins with survivors. Every kingdom begins with survivors. Every civilization begins with survivors. The descendants of those small populations continue expanding across the world. Their numbers gradually increase. Their territories broaden. Their knowledge accumulates. The process remains slow by modern standards. Centuries pass, then millennia. Generation follows generation. What begins as recovery eventually becomes transformation. One of the most remarkable aspects of this transformation is that it does not require any sudden revolution. There is no single invention that instantly changes everything. No dramatic event separates prehistoric survival from later civilization. Instead, humanity builds upon countless layers of accumulated experience. Knowledge preserved during the bottleneck becomes knowledge available to future generations. Techniques improve. Social networks expand. Environmental understanding deepens. Innovation continues. Each generation inherits more than genetic material. It inherits solutions. The ability to learn collectively may be humanity's greatest advantage. A successful strategy discovered in one era can remain useful thousands of years later. New challenges inspire new adaptations. Useful ideas spread. Unsuccessful approaches are abandoned. Over immense spans of time, this process creates extraordinary cumulative change. The descendants of the bottleneck survivors become increasingly capable of shaping their environments rather than merely responding to them. Long before agriculture appears, people are already altering landscapes in subtle ways. They influence animal populations. They manage resources. They move plants and materials. They create social relationships that extend across considerable distances. The seeds of later complexity are already present. Archaeologists continue debating exactly when many of these developments occur and how rapidly they spread. The evidence varies from region to region. Different populations follow different paths. No single explanation fully accounts for every trajectory, yet the overall pattern is difficult to ignore. Human societies become increasingly interconnected and increasingly adaptable. This growth prepares the way for later breakthroughs. Agriculture eventually emerges in several regions. Permanent settlements become more common. Population densities increase. Trade networks expand. Cities appear. Writing develops. States form. Empires rise. At first glance, these developments may seem unrelated to the ancient bottleneck. In reality, they are connected through an unbroken chain of ancestry and survival. Had the bottleneck ended differently, none of these later achievements would exist. The civilizations of Mesopotamia, the kingdoms of ancient Africa, the cities of South Asia, the dynasties of China, the societies of Europe, the cultures of the Americas, all emerge from populations ultimately descended from people who survived the darkest chapters of prehistory. The realization is profound. History often focuses on famous individuals, kings, generals, explorers, inventors. Yet the survival of humanity depends far more upon anonymous people whose names are permanently lost. A mother finding food during a difficult season, a family preserving knowledge of a distant water source, a community maintaining cooperation during hardship. These acts rarely attract attention, yet collectively they determine the future. The bottleneck survivors occupy a unique position in this story. They are not remembered because of what they build. They are remembered because they endure. Without endurance, no later achievements become possible. Another fascinating consequence of recovery involves cultural diversification. As populations expand into new environments, they encounter different challenges and opportunities. Deserts require different strategies than forests. Coastlines encourage different behaviors than mountains. Grasslands reward different forms of knowledge than wetlands. Human flexibility produces diversity. Different communities develop different traditions, different technologies, different ways of understanding the world. Over time, this diversity becomes one of humanity's defining characteristics. The descendants of a relatively small ancestral population eventually create thousands of cultures spread across nearly every habitable region on Earth. The contrast is striking. A bottleneck narrows humanity. Recovery multiplies it. The same species that once teeters on the edge of disappearance eventually becomes extraordinarily diverse and widespread. This expansion does not occur without cost. Environmental impacts increase. Competition emerges. Conflicts likely become more frequent as populations grow. Success creates new challenges. Yet the fundamental achievement remains remarkable. The species survives. Modern genetic research reinforces this connection between ancient survivors and later populations. Every living person carries traces of deep ancestry extending back through those difficult periods. Differences among modern populations are real, but they exist within a broader framework of shared origins. The bottleneck highlights this reality. Humanity's family tree may be vast, but its roots converge surprisingly quickly. The deeper researchers look into the past, the more interconnected human history becomes. Boundaries that seem significant in the present often dissolve across evolutionary timescales. The descendants of the survivors spread widely, adapt to different environments, and create distinct cultures, yet all remain linked through ancient chains of survival. What survives in the record suggests that the recovery is not merely demographic, it is creative. The species becomes increasingly capable of generating new solutions to new problems. That capacity ultimately drives the emergence of civilization itself. The first cities are still far in the future. Writing has not yet appeared. Empires remain unimaginable. Yet the foundations already exist. Communities capable of cooperation, networks capable of transmitting information, populations capable of adaptation, knowledge capable of accumulating across generations. These are the true ancestors of civilization, and all of them trace back to people who persist through humanity's darkest age. The survivors never know what lies ahead. They never see the pyramids. They never witness great libraries. They never hear orchestras, observe telescopes, or imagine spacecraft. Yet every one of those achievements depends upon their success. The future belongs to descendants they will never meet. A future built quietly generation by generation from the endurance of a few scattered communities who refuse to disappear. The last survivors of humanity's darkest age are gone. Their campsites have vanished. Their tools lie buried beneath layers of earth. Their voices have been silent for hundreds of thousands of years, and yet in a remarkable sense they never truly disappear. The traces remain everywhere, not always in obvious ways. Most people pass through their lives without thinking about ancient population bottlenecks, prehistoric refugees, or vanished human lineages. Modern cities seem infinitely removed from such distant events. Glass towers, highways, satellites, and digital networks create the impression that humanity has escaped the constraints that once governed survival. The deeper scientists investigate, however, the more visible the echoes become. One of the clearest examples appears within human genetics. Every living person carries evidence of ancient survival. The precise details remain subjects of ongoing research, but the broader conclusion is difficult to escape. Modern humanity descends from populations that endure severe challenges during deep prehistory. Those experiences leave measurable signatures that remain detectable today. The consequences extend far beyond ancestry. Certain genetic adaptations that help people survive particular environments trace their origins to ancient evolutionary pressures. Some populations carry inherited traits linked to high-altitude living. Others possess adaptations associated with disease resistance, climate conditions, or dietary changes. Many of these developments occur long after the bottleneck itself, but they unfold within populations shaped by earlier survival. The crisis leaves a framework upon which later evolution builds. The same pattern appears in geography. Certain regions continue attracting human settlement for astonishing lengths of time. River valleys remain important. Coastal zones remain important. Ecologically diverse landscapes remain important. The reasons are not mysterious. The environmental advantages that help prehistoric populations survive often remain valuable today. Modern cities frequently occupy locations that have drawn human communities for thousands of years. The landscapes change. The technology changes. The underlying logic often remains surprisingly familiar. Archaeology provides another connection. Every year, researchers uncover new evidence from sites scattered across Africa, Asia, Europe, and beyond. A fragment of bone, a buried hearth, a previously unknown tool tradition. Each discovery adds detail to a story that remains incomplete. What makes these discoveries especially significant is their ability to challenge assumptions. The image of early humans has changed dramatically over the past century. Populations once portrayed as primitive now appear highly adaptable. Communities once imagined as isolated reveal evidence of extensive interaction. Technologies once considered simple demonstrate surprising sophistication. The survivors continue teaching lessons long after their disappearance. One of those lessons concerns resilience. Human history often focuses on success, the rise of civilizations, technological achievements, scientific breakthroughs, political power. Yet the deeper story of humanity depends equally upon persistence. Most of the people who shape the future do not do so through conquest or invention. They do so through survival. The bottleneck survivors embody this reality. Their greatest accomplishment is not creating something new. It is ensuring that the possibility of future creation remains alive. This perspective changes how the past is viewed. History ceases to be a sequence of inevitable advances. Instead, it becomes a chain of contingent events. Small differences matter. A refuge that remains habitable. A migration that succeeds. A community that maintains cooperation. A population that survives one more difficult season. Any of these factors can influence outcomes across immense spans of time. The evidence repeatedly reminds researchers that extinction is never impossible. Entire human species disappear. Countless populations leave no descendants. Many branches of the broader human family tree end permanently. Modern humanity represents one surviving branch among many. This realization introduces a certain humility. The dominance of modern humans today can create the illusion that success is guaranteed. Deep history reveals otherwise. Survival is often fragile. Recovery is often uncertain. Chance frequently plays a role. The descendants of the bottleneck survivors inherit not only their achievements, but also the lessons embedded within their experience. Adaptation matters. Flexibility matters. Cooperation matters. Knowledge matters. These principles remain relevant even in a world transformed by technology. Climate still influences societies. Environmental change still shapes human behavior. Resource management still matters. The challenges differ from those faced by prehistoric communities, but some underlying realities remain surprisingly familiar. Perhaps this explains why the story continues attracting attention. It is not merely a tale about distant ancestors. It is also a reminder about the conditions that make survival possible. The archaeological record preserves another important lesson. Uncertainty is unavoidable. Despite decades of research, major questions remain unresolved. Scholars continue debating the severity of ancient bottlenecks. The role of climate, the influence of volcanic activity, the timing of demographic contractions, the importance of various refugees. New discoveries regularly modify existing interpretations. The story remains unfinished. In many ways, this uncertainty enhances rather than diminishes its significance. Science advances by acknowledging what remains unknown. The willingness to revise conclusions in response to new evidence has transformed understanding of humanity's past repeatedly. Future discoveries will almost certainly continue doing so. Perhaps new fossil sites await discovery. Perhaps ancient DNA will reveal previously unknown populations. Perhaps environmental records buried beneath oceans or deserts will illuminate missing chapters. The possibilities remain open, yet regardless of how specific details evolve, the central narrative appears increasingly secure. Humanity survives a period of extraordinary vulnerability. Small populations endure conditions capable of eliminating entire lineages. Recovery follows. Expansion follows. Civilization eventually follows. Every person alive today inherits the outcome. The last survivors of humanity's darkest age never intend to shape the future of the species. They simply continue living. They gather food, raise children, share knowledge, navigate uncertainty. One ordinary day follows another. The simplicity of those actions is precisely what makes them extraordinary, because through those actions, repeated across countless generations, they preserve something priceless. Not wealth, not power, not monuments. Possibility. The possibility that humanity's story will continue. And from that possibility emerges everything that follows, including the modern world itself. This story begins with uncertainty. It ends with uncertainty as well. After decades of research, thousands of excavations, countless genetic analyses, and increasingly sophisticated reconstructions of ancient environments, scholars understand far more about humanity's darkest age than previous generations ever could. Yet some of the most important questions remain only partially answered. How small does the human population truly become? Which refugees prove most important? How much of the crisis is driven by climate? How much by geological events? How many human populations disappear without leaving recognizable traces? The evidence continues to evolve. New discoveries arrive regularly. Ancient DNA extracted from a fragment of bone can alter long-standing assumptions. A previously unknown archaeological site can reshape migration models. Environmental records preserved beneath lake sediments or ocean floors can reveal climatic patterns invisible only a few years earlier. The story remains alive because the search continues, and perhaps that is fitting. Humanity's darkest age is not remembered through written testimony. It survives through fragments. Fragments of landscapes, fragments of fossils, fragments of genes, fragments of memory preserved within the earth itself. Researchers work with these fragments much as archaeologists assemble a shattered vessel. The original form can be glimpsed, but some pieces are missing forever. Certain details may never be recovered. The gaps matter, yet they do not erase the larger picture. A species encounters extraordinary challenges. Populations shrink. Entire lineages vanish. The margin separating survival from extinction becomes dangerously thin. Still enough people endure. Again and again that fact emerges from every line of evidence. The survivors do not possess advanced technology. They do not command vast armies. They do not build cities or monuments. Their strength lies elsewhere. Adaptability, cooperation, knowledge, persistence. These qualities carry humanity through one of the most vulnerable periods in its existence. Viewed across deep time, the achievement is astonishing. The modern world often feels inevitable because it already exists. Looking backward, it's easy to imagine history unfolding along a predetermined path leading toward the present. The evidence suggests something very different. Nothing is inevitable. Humanity survives because specific communities succeed where many others do not. A drought could have lasted longer. A refuge could have failed. A migration could have ended differently. A population could have vanished. The future that eventually emerges depends upon countless moments of uncertainty. This realization changes the meaning of survival. The bottleneck is not merely a demographic event. It is a reminder of contingency. The world that exists today is one possible outcome among many. Every language spoken today, every culture, every nation, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every human life, all ultimately depend upon a chain of survival stretching back into deep prehistory. Break the chain at any point and everything beyond it disappears. The last survivors never know this. They cannot imagine the civilizations that will eventually rise. They cannot foresee agriculture, writing astronomy, philosophy, industry, medicine, or spaceflight. They know only the immediate realities surrounding them. The next journey, the next season, the next generation. And perhaps that is why their story remains so compelling. It strips history down to its most essential elements. Before kingdom survival, before empire's survival, before technology survival, everything else comes later. The archaeological record repeatedly reveals this truth. Beneath every layer of civilization lies a deeper layer of endurance. Before people build, they must survive. Before they create, they must survive. Before they remember, they must survive. The bottleneck survivors preserve that possibility when it is least certain. Their achievement belongs not to famous individuals but to entire communities, families that remain together during hardship, groups that share resources, elders who preserve knowledge, children who grow into the next generation. The cumulative effect of these ordinary acts becomes extraordinary. Humanity continues. Another remarkable aspect of this story involves scale. The events unfold across immense spans of time. Tens of thousands of years pass, entire environments transform, species appear and disappear, geological processes reshape landscapes. Against such vast backgrounds, human lives seem fleeting. Yet it is precisely those fleeting lives that alter the outcome. A single generation preserves knowledge. The next passes it onward. The next survives a difficult season. The next expands into new territory. Tiny decisions accumulate across millennia. The future emerges from them. The lesson extends beyond prehistory. Again and again, human societies confront challenges that appear overwhelming in the moment. Environmental change, resource pressure, uncertainty, and disruption are not unique to one era. They recur throughout history in different forms. The survivors of humanity's darkest age demonstrate something fundamental about the species. Human beings are remarkably capable of adaptation, not invulnerable, not guaranteed success, but capable of responding creatively to difficult circumstances. The archaeological, genetic, and environmental records all point toward this conclusion. Survival is not passive, it is active. It requires learning, cooperation, flexibility, and persistence. The people who endure the bottleneck embody those qualities. Their legacy is visible everywhere, even if their names are lost forever. Every living person represents evidence that they succeed. Every human community represents evidence that they succeed. The modern world itself represents evidence that they succeed. And so the story comes full circle. It begins with scattered populations facing a world that seems increasingly hostile. It ends with a species that survives long enough to inherit an entire planet. Between those 2 points lies one of the most extraordinary journeys in human history. A journey carried not by conquerors or kings, but by ordinary people who refuse to disappear. The last survivors of humanity's darkest age leave no monuments behind. Their monument is humanity itself. The traces of those distant survivors remain faint, a fragment of stone buried beneath ancient soil, a strand of ancestry carried invisibly through countless generations, a forgotten campsite overlooking a vanished river, small clues scattered across enormous distances connected only by time. Most of the people who lived through humanity's darkest age leave no recognizable mark upon the historical record. Their names disappear, their stories disappear. Even the landscapes they know often change beyond recognition. Yet something survives, not memory in the usual sense, something deeper, continuity, across hundreds of thousands of years through climatic shifts, migrations, extinctions and recoveries. An unbroken chain extends from those ancient communities to the present day. The chain is fragile. At many points it could have ended. The evidence suggests that entire populations vanish. Human relatives disappear forever. Environmental pressures repeatedly narrow the possibilities available to the species. Still enough people endure. A few communities find refuge. A few generations preserve knowledge. A few families carry life forward. The future remains uncertain, but it remains possible. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden within this ancient story. Civilizations often seem permanent while they exist. Landscapes appear stable. Human achievements appear enduring. Yet deep time reveals a different perspective. Change is constant. Survival is never guaranteed. The world is always in motion. And yet amid that motion life continues. The descendants of the survivors spread across continents. They build cities, create languages, explore oceans, and eventually begin uncovering the story of their own origins. Piece by piece they learn about the people whose perseverance makes everything else possible. Far behind the modern world, beyond written history, beyond agriculture, beyond memory itself, small groups gather around fading fires beneath unfamiliar stars. They do not know they stand at the edge of extinction. They do not know they stand at the beginning of everything that follows. They simply continue, one season after another, one generation after another, and in the vast silence of prehistory that simple act becomes one of the greatest achievements in the human story.